Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to another live webinar. My name is Ese Tustofile, and I work for a company called Cloud EDU, which is Education Solutions. We're based out here in Cape Town, South Africa. We are Google's premier partner. Today, we are going to be having a wonderful conversation with two members that I'll be introducing to you shortly. A little bit more about myself. So I am the Google Workspace Transformation Specialist. So I deal with the higher education institutions from the tip of South Africa all the way up until the most northerly part of Africa. So we as Cloud EDU, we focus on a couple of different elements, one of them being a professional development where change management is our key driver for technology adoption. We are also the tier one Chromebooks reseller across Africa. So if the institution is ready for any form of educational tool set in order for them to drive their education and ICT integration, look us up and we are ready to assist you in those regards. And then for those institutions that are already gone Google, and you probably had some way of which you got Google right into your institution, and you just wanted that partner that knows exactly what it is that they are doing to do an audit, to just make sure that everything, all the policies are in place. We do technical audits for institutions that have not really gone Google yet, but they are quite interested in going Google. So we also do deployments to the institutions that have not got a learning management solution yet. With that being said and done, I would like to jump into my two friends. Guys, how are you?
Yes, doing well, Asetu. Very well
Very
indeed.
good. Thanks for having us.
Yes. So I've got Alistair and I've got Oli. I'll just like to ask Alistair, can you please just give us a roundabout? Who is Alistair before we jump into Oli?
Absolutely, yeah. So, Alistair, I'm also with the Cloud EDU team. My background is in education. Spent 20 years in schools in K to 12. Got involved in everything with a plug from a technical
Nice.
perspective. But actually got very disillusioned quite quickly with IT and the promise of IT changing education. Didn't see that take place. But what I did see take place was teachers adopting education and teachers being the instrument of change. And with technology getting simpler, particularly with cloud-based, we saw a wrestle where educationalists were starting to make those decisions. So 8 years we've been in Cloud EDU. We work from the top of Africa, as you've mentioned, right down to the bottom, and focus on education institution, focus on Google Workspace, safety and security, adoption, anything where technology can impact education is where we're at.
No, thank you so much, Mr. Payne. Oli.
Cool. Hey, I'm Oli. Again, spent all my life in education. I was a teacher for about 8 years over at schools here in London. I joined the Google for Education team, though, about 3 years ago. So I work as a solutions engineer now. So I am responsible for working with our biggest kind of customers and partners like Cloud EDU on the technical integration of Google Workspace and Chromebooks and everything else that comes around with Google for Education. So we've seen some massive changes over the last 3 years. Really happy to be here today and answer any questions. I think there's a huge opportunity for universities in Africa, and really excited to see where this takes us.
No, definitely.
I think in our preamble as well, Esetu, we picked up that both Oli, yourself, and myself were all maths specialists in education at some point.
Yes,
Esetu, you are the chief here because you have a PhD in mathematics, so all from a mathematics background.
Yeah. So it was always nice to see engaging in a mathematics as a concept, but then you migrated over into so what is the ceiling of what you can actually do? Because it's nice to do numbers, but you want to see how do these numbers translate into a real world application. So I think that's why I decided to just pursue further studies. But you know what, from being in an African context, one thing that always eluded me was, so how do I make this more meaningful for myself? Because there is this growing misconception, that Africa, nothing is happening. We have got too many different problems. Nothing can actually work in Africa. If I'm just thinking out aloud, I think there is a growing concept of, we are lacking connectivity, we're lacking infrastructure, we're lacking resources. So, Mr. Payne, I don't know if you can literally just quickly unpack from what you have seen from a data perspective. how does Africa look from a higher education institution and their ICT space? How does the landscape look?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, listen, I think the word you use, misconception, is absolutely spot on. There's a misconception about Africa. And sometimes we do get down about it. The way we see it, the way I see it, is it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to bring opportunities to the youth of Africa. It's an opportunity to do good in Africa, for us to blossom and grow, for lack of a better term. And it's only because in Cape Town we're sitting in springtime that it's kind of foremost in mind. But there is a misconception that in Africa we're kind of behind the trend in some ways. We are actually able to do some investigation on this. We're able to look at sort of the public-facing email records and say, okay, what are universities using to, at least at its foremost, what are they using to house their mail? And it's very interesting that the vast majority out of the top 500 universities are using cloud-based systems. And out of the top 500, a total of 52% are using Google Workspace. So we kind of like debunk that misconception right out the starting blocks. It is kind of fair to say that is very much on the email first side of things, but some very interesting stats.
No, that's great, man. You mentioned 52%. Can you just elaborate? What does this number mean in terms of, from a usage perspective? What are they using Google for when it comes to that number?
Right. So, I mean, I think one of the points of this session is to get into the things that you don't know about Google. It is a Google Workspace. It's a vast tool set that has grown dramatically over 10 years. And I don't think I'm overstating that. But for many of the universities that are using Workspace, they're primarily just using it as an email system. And the email system is used to filter mail, to store mail, to create accounts easily and simply. And that's been pretty much it on that side. So it's been quite simplistic to start off with.
Okay. Sure. I mean, this is good. So guys, you don't mind me just jumping in and asking you some questions around Google Workspace? Are you
Please,
good?
yeah, sounds good to me.
Awesome. So let me just get started by just asking this question. How are universities utilizing Google Workspace alongside other products or other services that they have at their institutions, whether it's a learning management solution, whether it's a content management solution, whatever other hybrid solution that they're using to manage education? How have you seen those universities utilizing the Google Workspace to integrate into those other already existing systems?
Cool. That's a great question. So before we delve into it, let's go back in time a little bit to April Fool's Day 2004, where Google launched Gmail, so a revolutionary new, simple-to-use email service. So launched on April Fool's Day, but absolutely no joke, and we've just seen it go from strength to strength. It's one of the most trusted email providers around the world right now. And so shortly after that, in sort of October 2006, we launched what was called Google Apps for Education back then. And most universities we saw, more than kind of schools, really jumped on this as a way to get a free but secure and easy to manage email service. And as Alistair alluded to, it's been really prominent, really popular. And so that 52% of the top 500, that's just email, right? And there might be other universities using other workspace services, but perhaps not email. So moving on from there, and sort of 15 plus years in the future, we know that in practice, most universities and actually the businesses and schools that we work with, they have their own identity management system.
Yeah.
So what we provide is really easy to configure tools to make provisioning and single sign-on super simple, either to Google for Education or from Google for Education as a primary IDP. And it's fully up to you how you want to go ahead and customize that. We see less kind of universities using Google as their primary IDP, but we are seeing a few pockets of this. It's a fully robust, like enterprise IDP. You can do single sign-on to other services. The security elements are kind of enterprise class. So we are seeing a slight trend, although slow, of moving to Google as a primary IDP. But we know that universities, they've come to rely on loads of additional tools within the Google ecosystem, such as Calendar. We've added, as I mentioned, some enterprise grade features in Standard and Plus, such as context-aware access to really help you keep your user data safe in the cloud. And likewise, we know that Google is actually part of a wider ecosystem of tools that you as universities and your users might be using. So we make sure that we give all the admins full control over how users can use their Google accounts with other third-party services. So, for example, which apps they might be able to authenticate into, what data they can grant access to. So it's fully at your disposal and control as to how you use your Google accounts with the rest of the web, or even some internal tools using SSO or SAML protocols. So yeah, Workspace has evolved in the last sort of 15 years from basically just a way to get free Gmail to a fully featured enterprise productivity suite. It's actually trusted by over 60 businesses and education institutions around the world, and they rely on that for their work daily.
Yeah. So, Oli, I mean, we're seeing this quite a bit in universities where they might have an ERP or a school management system or the place where the students are created, and there might be some finance happening on that side.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is an integration that is automatically provisioning the users into the Google Workspace environment. So that there is an identity here in the Workspace environment, a username and a password. And then most commonly, we're seeing single sign-on SSO to something like an existing LMS. So a Canvas, a Blackboard, a Moodle, so that the student doesn't have multiple usernames and passwords. There's one username and password, to quote Lord of the Rings, to rule them all. But essentially, that's heavy lifting.
Exactly.
And the impact of that in Africa is that essentially Google is doing that lifting for you, because that requires resources, it requires intellectual, physical resources, and Google are doing that on your behalf. So your LMS is not necessarily being bogged down with those consistent calls coming in.
Yeah, sure. Exactly that. And just taking that a stage further, Alistair, using your Lord of the Rings analogy, the one ring to rule them all process, we've actually evolved in that. So you can now have multiple rings. So let's imagine you've got some HR folk who sign in with an HR system on a daily basis. You might want to allow those to using the HR system, but you might have a bunch of kind of lecturers or faculty members that want to sign in with maybe their Azure or Microsoft account credentials. And then perhaps you've got all of your students who want to sign in natively with Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, or even just standard Google accounts. So you can have multiple single sign-on profiles in one university tenant now, which is really, really handy.
And also just to bolt onto that, dynamic groups, that's available in Plus, which is an automatic population of groups based on an attribute. Exactly. So as you're saying, HR department would come in, dynamically put it in a group, and then you can treat them according to resources that are deployed or logins that are deployed based on that dynamic group. So we find that in the Plus edition and the paid editions are very, very compelling feature sets.
Sure. Guys, you guys are talking good stuff here. What I'm hearing here is Google has taken on the role of actually doing some of the heavy lifting when it comes to user management, when it comes to authentication. So now my question is, what about the storage of documents? Can these integrations help the two? Would this type of integration then serve as a document repository of some sort?
Yeah, great question. So we see this as one of the key factors to kind of move or integrate Google with existing ecosystems, right? So we can actually take a lot of the hard work or the complexities or the management of file storage from whether that's an on-premise or your own cloud-hosted LMS system, and just integrate that with Google Drive super seamlessly. So I'll talk, if we get a chance later, about kind of Google Classroom and our assignments product, which has got just default integration with Drive. We have basically APIs available for all of our Workspace products. And so we have a number of kind of like easy to use libraries for either third-party developers or universities themselves. Things like Drive pickers, which is just a real simple one line of code that makes it really easy for students and faculty members to add content from Drive into an LMS course, for example. We see universities making use of the Drive API themselves to make copies of files in bulk, or perhaps creating a shared drive for every course. If you're doing some bulk creation in Canvas or Moodle, for example, you could also create a shared drive at the same time, for example. And then Google Forms. So if you've got some sort of quiz repository, you could use Google Forms for that. All of that data is automatically shared to Google Sheets. And we've got APIs for forms and sheets, so you could really easily extract those scores and put them in another database without having to worry about where you're going to store those that quiz data or student data. It's all safely secure in Google Drive. And also we see Google Drives become really manageable to collaborate and work with external users as well. So perhaps you've got students in a kind of pre-admission stage. You might want to collect some documents. You could actually have Google Drive as a shared drive or a form upload to collect key information around registration, without having to worry about where you're going to keep that, or additional kind of web forms that you might have to pay for to keep all that data. And there's some really great stuff. We might get a chance later to talk about kind of some of the video playback, but YouTube, whilst isn't necessarily a Drive product, it's an additional service. There's some really great things you can do with YouTube, and particularly for maybe students who might have lack of internet access at home, or if they're traveling, for example. We do some really clever stuff with YouTube, like dynamic bitrate changing. There's offline modes for YouTube as well. Some really clever stuff that you can do. So Drive's great, but there's a whole plethora of other tools that you can make use of as a university.
So, I mean, Oli, listen, we all know how amazing YouTube is. It's used extensively. I would love to know someday, like, kind of what those numbers are on a daily basis. And that variable bitrate is perfect. So it's form factor of what the student has in hand and the connectivity that has available, and it will then scale itself down to providing at least the best experience for that particular student. I've also seen people delivering video content through Google Drive. I know that's not the recommended. The recommended is delivered through YouTube, but I've actually seen some great results in that regard as well.
Yeah, so Drive, it uses a similar kind of player and encoder that we use in YouTube. We would recommend, though, that if your lecturers or you as a university have got lots of video content, YouTube's a kind of a better place for it. There's kind of unlimited storage in your YouTube channel. You can have things like brand accounts for universities, so really good for kind of public facing channels. We've also, it's worth noting, we started building some better integrations to our core product set with YouTube. So if you have Education Plus now, for example, you can live stream directly from a Google Meet to a YouTube live stream. And that's really good for kind of like your lecturers or faculty members. Perhaps they need to record some lessons for students to either join remotely or watch after the fact. Just knowing that they can automatically upload that to YouTube, and it's then available within a few moments, is really, really powerful. And that's not going to impact any kind of Drive storage that you'll have at university as well.
No, and you guys have made it really, really simple. I mean, there's a lot of heavy lifting. I mean, previously I would have done, OBS or whatever that product is called. There's an open source product that allows you to record and broadcast live, but it's dependent on the machine that you're on, dependent on both your upload and download speeds for certainly for the live streaming side of things. Where with the Google Beats to live stream, it is taken all of that heavy lifting away from you and makes it a simple task. A click of a button. In fact, it makes it almost oversimplified, and people don't realize what they're getting at the end of the day.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I think, one thing that I've learned from COVID is that most institutions were always looking for the better way of engaging with the students. And I think the reliance on a recording functionality made people jump onto different video conferencing tool sets. So now we've got a lot of universities right across Africa who say, listen, we are either on a fundamentals package or on something else. We want to find the best way at which we can find the best video conferencing tool set. And they love Meet, but they want to be able to record. Now, what I want to know is that when you spoke about some integrations, can we also do an integration with respect to a Meet with an already existing learning management solution?
Yeah, cool. It's a great question. We hear it a lot. And actually, we go back to kind of the start of the pandemic you mentioned. Google Meet, it was actually one of our least used core tools in education. So businesses were using it, but pre-pandemic, it wasn't that well used. And it scaled up by, I think it was about 3,000% in just the first kind of few weeks. So we went from, incredible scale, so 30x, right? Went from just a handful of users to over 100 million users per day joining calls. So it became really vital to keep learning going at the start of 2020. And it's worth noting that Meet, just by default, is really tightly integrated to all of our other products, such as Calendar, Classroom. So for many universities who are already existing using Workspace in the full package, it was an absolute no-brainer, and adoption was completely natural. But it's really good to know that some other kind of things that we've heard. So universities, perhaps they were using a third-party LMS, so like a Moodle, a Blackboard, or a Canvas. we've got a feature in Meet called Nickname Meets. And so we saw some really creative tools back in kind of like April 2020 of universities using nicknames or unique codes to very quickly create a meet per class, for example, and allow that learning to just continue seamlessly. Essentially making a secure meet that anybody could join just with their Google account. So no need for an additional kind of like third-party sign-in. So that worked really well. It also ended up with those folk who were already using kind of Workspace not needing to have to pay for an additional solution. And so one thing that's been really great, if there is any kind of like silver linings from a terrible pandemic, is some of our products have grown so quickly, and the Meet engineering team have grown from like a small team of kind of 4 who sat in Munich to this globally distributed mega engineering team. And the product continues to evolve at such a pace. And so recording seems like just a no-brainer, but it's something that took a bit of engineering to kind of build in. And so Meet's now a pretty fully featured, super private, super secure, breakout rooms, inbuilt activities. We've got capacity for up to 1,000 people to join a single Meet now. Live streaming externally to YouTube, internal live streaming for hundreds of thousands of users. So it's a really fully featured product. And I think once you combine that with Education Plus or Teaching and Learning Upgrade, you get some really nice additional features with it.
Yeah, and also just to be bolt on that, Oli, there's an incredible amount of data coming out of that Meet or being collected in what we call log files. So we're seeing some of our institutions getting to the heart of what is our engagement like in this video conferencing world, which is challenging. And there are multiple data points: who joined, when, what duration, attendance tracking is part of the Plus edition as well, that can be aggregated and kind of been visualized, and having a look at things like what is the engagement? Oh, what was the quality of the delivery of the video content from a technical perspective, jitter, bitrate, all those kinds of things down to the student. So you can really track the quality of that engagement. What you don't want at the end of the day is the student having a bad experience and not adopting or not being engaged.
Exactly. And there's an incredible amount of data there, as you mentioned. We've got some kind of huge countrywide deployments, like Indonesia, kind of 30 million students across the country, right? And you hear these great stories of the IT admin being able to really identify kind of how students access their learning from home. So as you mentioned, you could see the network strength, the bit rate that's being delivered, whether there were any errors for a particular student. You can also see what kind of device they're joining from. So whether they're joining from a full screen operating system or if it's an Android or a mobile operating system. And it allowed some of the governments at this massive scale to really identify, okay, which students need the best at-home support and target the funds accordingly. And so it's really, really incredible. Some great stories that came out of it.
Yeah, and I think, Oli, that's really important across the world, but in particular in Africa. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't have barrel loads of cash to just throw randomly at projects and see whether they float or sink. Yeah. We need to be very intelligent in the way that and wise in the way that we target our resources, and the data allows us to do that. And that's what's exciting.
Yeah, and I love what you just said, because, you know, at times people have a lot of money, they don't know where to channel the money, and the ability for you to have data ready sitting over there to say, listen, you can't deploy such services to such an environment because of what the data looks like. But now we know exactly what we need to do to intervene. So I heard you speak about some integrations when it comes to some Drive. I heard you about Meeting. Is there any other integrations that you have for us, Oli?
Yeah, how long do you have? As I mentioned before, we've got APIs for kind of all of our products, and so it's incredible what people and companies can build to integrate here. That's one of the biggest kind of ethos within Google. So build great products, but also make them as customizable as people need. But a few that I'm really excited about. The first one is Google Chat. So Chat's evolving to include this kind of product called Spaces, which is more of this kind of like larger scale forum discussion. And there's loads of really cool functionality coming, such as multiple threading, topics. But we're also adding like really good APIs to manage chat spaces and the members and permissions within that as well. So one thing that I can see happening pretty soon is the ability to basically create a chat space, like a forum, per course, or you could even make it larger per kind of subject or faculty within university. And then within there, you could have multiple threads or topics. You could have a way of really easily kind of communicating bulk to all of your students or all of your faculty members in like a read-only chat space. And all of this can be done automatically via API. So either front-end UI or whatever it might be, but I can see some really exciting things coming there. And then also talking about chat, we've got this concept of chatbots, and there's some amazing things happening around the world. So the APIs actually make chatbots really simple to kind of build. And we see some cool ideas like building off a simple database of maybe frequently asked questions. And so there's a few universities here in the UK that have built these chatbots to help their students get answers when they need it to key questions like what time's lacrosse practice this week, or where do I need to go if I want to get some counselling support? And all of that can be really quickly, dynamically served without having to take up precious resource from a university help desk, for example. You can also use it to maybe just organize events between staff. So maybe you and I are said to want to have a quick meeting. I could just ask a chatbot to arrange us a time, and it would look at our calendars and find when we're free and just automatically create that for us. So really excited to see chat evolve as a cool product. I also love Google Sites. So universities and schools around the world are starting to rely on Google Sites. You talked about kind of letting us do the heavy lifting for you. If you've got any kind of like website hosting, you might want to consider using Google Sites for kind of your external sites or even just internal ones per faculty. Super simple to create. You can edit them collaboratively live like you would a normal kind of Google document. And there's a new Sites API coming soon, which will allow you to kind of bulk create, bulk edit all of these Google Sites in your university. And if I've got time for one more, AppSheet is a really, really cool product. So we acquired a company called AppSheet, I think about 3 years ago. And it's a really great kind of low code / no code solution that builds on Google Sheets as a database. So really simple to get started. All the data on the back end is super simple to analyze. If you know how to edit a spreadsheet or kind of query a spreadsheet, you don't have to be this SQL database expert. But it's great. And so normally it's $10 per user per month if you just buy it off the shelf. But we actually include it for free with Education Plus, which is just, it baffles me what a great deal that is. But we see some really cool things happening around the world. So even just simple using it as like a reception sign in, sign out process. Super simple to configure. We've got loads of great templates for that, or like inventory trackers for maybe resources within a faculty. Some really cool things coming there. So if you haven't explored AppSheet and you've got Education Plus, just get playing with it. It's a really great tool.
Yeah, we've seen AppSheet used wouldn't say extensively, but very well in certain use cases here in South Africa itself, for people that are on the road, field workers that need a very structured feedback. I know a Google form could do something similar, but the AppSheet just makes it a lot simpler to be able to collect that data on the go.
Agree.
Yeah. Listen, Oli, you spoke about chatbots before I go into AppSheet. So you mean to tell me that we can have a tutor in our pocket for as long as you've got a nice library of terms? So because I know when I was still doing my undergrad, you struggled to find time with a tutor, and you had these probably easy for them type questions that you probably just wanted it to be revisited. So you mean to tell me that through these spaces, you can create a bot that is able to just engage with you as if you are literally sitting with a tutor?
You got it, yeah. Super easy. You've got a natural language processing API, which is pretty easy to integrate. So it can even detect how happy or sad you are about the problem that you're asking.
What?
Respond appropriately. Really clever, right? Yeah.
No, this is good. So one more question before we finish the session off. I heard about a product that Google has, and it's called Google Classroom. So now I don't know whether Google Classroom is a learning management system or what would you classify Google Classroom as, and how can universities leverage off of this LMS for themselves?
Cool. It's a great question. Not a particularly easy answer, but I'll give it my best shot. So Google Classroom is about 7 years old now, and it started through a need that our Google for Education team saw, so a bunch of previous teachers and software engineers, to simplify kind of classroom instruction. So I remember back in the day before Google Classroom, there was a Google Sheets add-on called Doctopus that was really popular at kind of distributing assignments and allowing teachers to kind of grade and return those all in a folder. It's So we basically took a lot of that functionality that existed and just made it into a really nice, easy to use UI essentially. And its success was in its simplicity, right? So what we heard from a lot of teachers, particularly in the K-12 space, was that what might have taken many clicks in an LMS unnecessarily so could be achieved in just a few in Google Classroom. So when it started, it wasn't particularly advanced. It was just a way for teachers to kind of do work, distribute work, and grade work from their students. There was no gradebook, for example, when it first launched. But since then, so in the last 7 years, it is actually getting progressively more advanced. But one thing that we really want to stick true to is just the simple point of entry for both kind of teachers or faculty members and students to go ahead and use. So like all of our other products, we also allow an API access to all of this. So we actually see some really cool stuff. We see organizations having the ability to like bulk create courses, bulk create the rosters, actually bulk create assignments, for example, and manage those, extracting grades from Classroom and putting them elsewhere. We've actually now got a roster sync tool. So if you've got a one roster set of CSV files or an SIS system, you can actually sync those to courses and create courses in Classroom automatically with Education Plus. But we also know that actually many universities already pretty heavily invested in an existing LMS, so either financially or just from like a resource and training perspective. And that existing LMS may offer more functionality that's required than what currently exists in Google Classroom. So a few years ago, what we did is we basically took the best bits of Google Classroom and we released that in a package called Assignments. And that can either be used as a standalone platform or it can actually integrate really easily and seamlessly with your LMS system. So Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, just via a kind of LTI key or API key that you might need. So this is great because it allows staff to make use of the best bits of kind of classroom distribution, so management of work, inbuilt grading and all the great stuff there, and originality reports, all within the existing ecosystem that you might have. So this is really, really, really powerful. And going back to what we talked about at the top of the session around kind of allowing Google to take all the kind of the pain and management of all of your Drive ecosystems and the ACLs required, it just handles that automatically and seamlessly in the background. So one thing to note is we're actually also working with some of the largest kind of like LMS providers in the world to bring additional functionality to the assignments product. So one recent launch, if you use Canvas, for example, and you'll really like the speed grader tool, you can now use the speed grader tool on assignments that are distributed through the Google Assignments product. So seeing massive uptake initially in the first few weeks of launch of that. So really exciting to see where that comes.
The way we kind of present it to our clients is to say Google Classroom is a quasi management system, learning management system, very good for K-12. Some of our smaller to medium-sized universities love it as well. But if you are an LMS, Google Assignments is essentially the engine room out of Google Classroom directly into that LMS.
Great description.
Yeah, no, guys, I'm super excited about what I've just heard today. And I'm sure that the universities right across Africa will also appreciate the knowledge that isn't coming just from some technical guys, that is actually coming from people who are educators and who have found a passion in trying to find solutions to some of the growing aches. Because I think we all migrated over to ICT integration by virtue of us trying to leverage off of what technology can offer us to deliver a better product when it comes to our student engagements. So I would like to thank you guys. Is there any last words from you guys? Anything that you'd like to say before I close the session off?
Just thanks for having me. It's been great. It's always lovely chatting with you both.
Yeah,
No, Seti, I think just from my side, I think and something I didn't mention right at the beginning around the single sign-on is that it does lower the barrier to entry and makes it easier for people to log in when you have one username and password. And then just to reiterate that Google is able to do a lot of the heavy lifting around providing these resources that we don't have access to and helping impact and lowering the virtual cost of connectivity. So really a great tool set.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that. And from my side, I would just like to thank both of you for the wonderful session. And thank you for all our viewers for sticking it out to the end. I'd like to just put maybe a few announcements. I'll put them on the chat. But one of them is that if you are a university that is either on fundamentals and you are interested in, because you hear all of these crazy stuff that Alistair and Oli might have spoken about, and you would have heard them hinting towards education plus, education plus. So if you are interested in having a tryout for 60 days, I'm going to be putting a link on the side chat so that you are able to just quickly request for us to actually do that deployment for a 60-day trial for you. Or if you are an institution and you are not really Google yet, but you are quite interested in going Google, so we do have fundamentals deployment that we can actually do for those institutions. So we can definitely do fundamentals for those institutions. And yeah, listen, we are going to be keeping these up and running for the next couple of weeks. So please stay tuned to more upcoming webinars specifically for HEIs. Don't forget, if you're on YouTube right now, please like and subscribe to our channel, and I look forward to having further engagements with you. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Pleasure. Cheers, guys.
Thanks all.